We find something interesting in Parshat Ekev. It's a command which comes up actually twice. And the commentaries, going from Chazal all the way through modern times, had a really difficult time understanding exactly what are the parameters of this commandment. On the one hand, it says in Perek Yud Aleph, it says that we have an obligation. I'm going in the middle of the pasuk, pasuk Kaf Bet, Uliavat Hashem Elokeichem, lelechet b'chol drachav, uledavka bo. We're told that we should love God, we should walk in His ways, walk in His paths, and to cling to Him, ledavka bo. Previously, in Perek Yud, there was a similar formulation where it says, Et Hashem Elokecha tira, oto ta'avod, ubo tidbak, uvashmo tishavea. But again, the term tidbak, ledavka, to cling to, is used in both of these examples. And as I said, it's something which the commentaries have a hard time trying to figure out what exactly it is that we need to do. Now, this term, ledavka bo, is found in another place in the Torah, which actually may be the thing which gave license to the Rambam to do something which was actually remarkable. And I'll explain exactly what that means. In the very beginning, when Adam is presented, or when Eve is presented to Adam, it says, Al Kain, Yazov ish et aviv et imo, v'davka be'ishto, v'yu lebasar echad. So this phrase, v'davak be'ishto, is one which I think is really quite difficult also for us to understand. On top of everything else, who's the one who makes that comment? Is it an editorial comment by God? Is it something which is said by Adam? Now, let's just consider for a moment that it is an editorial comment which is made by God, and therefore God is telling man that he should cling to his wife. That's really quite informative. The Rambam that I was referring to earlier says as follows. The Rambam states that what exactly is Ahavat Hashem? What exactly is the situation that a person should have when they love God? Remember that first verse that I cited, Uliavat Hashem Elokeichem lechet b'chol drachav uledavka bo. So even though most of the commentaries have, as I said, a really hard time, the Rambam says, V'ketzad yava haru'uya. What exactly is the proper type of love which a person should have for God? Hu she'ahavet Hashem ava gdola yitera azah ma'od. Really strong formulation. A person should love God with a great love, which is really a superior love, which is a burning love, a strong love, exceedingly. Ad she'nafsho k'shura be'avat Hashem, until a person's soul is actually intermingled with the love of God. V'nimtza shogebo tamid כאילו כל לחולי אהבה, שאין דעתו פנייה מאהבת אותו אישה, והוא שגה בה תמיד בין בשבתו בין בקומו, בין בשעה שהוא אוכל ושותה. So it's a long sentence. I just want to note, it says בין בשבתו בין בקומו, when you lie down, when you get up. That should remind us of the Shema, and I don't believe that's an accident on the Rambam's part. He says the love of God should be like the love that a man would have for his wife. It should be one which constantly preoccupies their mind, where they're thinking about all the time, which means real love of God is the type of love we should have, even when we are not necessarily in, let's put it like this, it's the thing which should be either in the back or in the fore of our mind while we're doing other things, which means we should constantly be thinking. One of the things that one could talk about relationships is that we need to stop thinking in a narcissistic, in a individual way in terms of I, but rather that I has to switch and become instead we. We, how we look at the world. We should be taking care of one another. We should be thinking about one another. And that's a shift. It's not a simple thing to do. Now, what's interesting about this Rambam is it comes in the 10th chapter of the laws of tshuva. This whole 10th chapter doesn't really talk about tshuva, but it talks about serving God through love, which means the ultimate point of tshuva is fixing the relationship to the point that God is in our minds. Presumably, when we get to that point, then perhaps sin becomes impossible. Now, all this is part one. Just to recap, what is it that we saw? That this terminology of clinging to God was already found. A man should cling to his wife. And the Rambam compares, again, he doesn't use the word clinging, but I think it's these verses which are opened up in front of him or in the back of his mind that he's thinking of as he creates this understanding about how is it that we're supposed to love God the same way that we love a spouse. And I'll say it again, I think it was the word v'davka, to cling to, which is what gave the Rambam the license to make this comparison, and therefore said this idea that we cling to God means that God should always be in our mind. As the Rambam completes the 10th chapter of Tshuva, which is the final chapter, not just in the laws of Tshuva, but in the whole book of Mada. Mada has to do with ideas, with thought, yediyah. Davar yadua, again, notice the word yediyah. Davar yadua v'or she'ein ahavat HaKadosh Baruch Hu niksheret b'libo shel adam ad sheyishkeh bo tamid k'ra'ui v'yazov et kol ma she'ba'olam chutz mimena. So the Rambam again is coming back to this point about the love of God. Now I need to make an observation here. The Rambam is finishing the laws of Hilchot Deot, and he's actually making a really interesting introduction to the laws of Ahava. That's the next book, which is coming up. So he speaks about Yedi'ah leading to Ahava. And by the way, Ahava is not just thought. Ahava actually needs actions. The beginning of Sefer Ahava is Kriyat Shema. Remember, we noted when you lie down and when you get up. When you say Shema, when you lie down and when you get up. That wasn't an accident. Kemoshe tziva v'amar b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha. Again, the Rambam is going back to the laws of Shema with all of your heart and all of your souls, which of course is a formulation which is primarily in the Shema. Ein ohev HaKadosh Baruch Hu ela b'dat sheyadeu. The way that you love God is by knowing, meaning you can't love someone unless you know them, and once you know God, then one is forced to get to this situation of love. The more there's understanding of God, the more there should be love, is what the Rambam postulates. Again, going back to Shema, which is Yichud Hashem, a person should be Yached Atzmo, should get themselves prepared, Lahavinu Lahaskel, B'chochmat Uvetfunot, Hamodi'im Lo. Look, it's really interesting how many times he comes back to this forms of this De'ah. Modi'im Lo et Kono Kafi Koch Sheish Badam Lavinu Lasig Kamo Shebiarnu Bilchot Yisodei HaTorah. Now, in the laws of Ahava is the Shema, is Tefillah, Brit Milah. But there's another whole section, and that is the brachot. And it's here that, again, I want to pause. Brachot are very much a part of the day and of the life and of the, I would say, the whole texture of the existence of the Jew. We're constantly saying brachot. We're constantly praising God for different things in our lives. Now, if we really thought about this, when it comes to brachot themselves, there are not that many brachot which are really from the Torah. One which is obvious, which ironically or not, is back in Parshat Ekev, and that is Birchat Hamazon, V'achalta v'savata u'virachta, which means we have an obligation of making a bracha after we eat. Of course, the Gemara then says, hold it. If we have to make a bracha after we eat, then we should, by logic, also make a bracha when we're hungry before we eat. So that's interesting, because that creates, again, this whole world of brachot. Other things which, again, one can argue, Torah or not, one would be the Birkat Kohanim, okay? The bracha of the Kohanim when they bless the people. Whether it's only inside the Beit HaMikdash, outside of the Beit HaMikdash, again, is something which is worthwhile discussing at another time. The other bracha, perhaps the Birkat HaTorah, has a similarity that you, like eating, you can't eat unless you make a bracha. You can't enjoy Torah, you can't enjoy this world unless you make a bracha. But again, most brachot are really midrabanan, or really a rabbinic creation. So now let's think about what the rabbis did. The rabbis created a situation that the word of God and the thought of God and that the blessings of God should always be on our lips. It says in the Gemara we should be saying 100 brachot in a day, which means what they tried to do was to take these feelings and take these thoughts, and let's be honest, maybe we really didn't always think or feel that way, and turn it into a verbalization. Let's go back now and think about that relationship which the Rambam spelled out. It's not enough for a husband or a wife to feel appreciation to their spouse. It's really good if we articulate it. It's really good if we articulate it a lot. It's really good if we would articulate it after any and everything which the other person does for us. Thank you for doing the laundry. Thank you for making dinner. thank you for whatever it is that a person did for us. I'm saying that little thing called thank you, appreciation, and then expressing the appreciation is something which makes us better people, but it also makes the relationship stronger. I think it's possible that this idea, and again, I'm just following the Rambam's logic over here, moving from the book of Mada, of understanding, to the book of love, which then becomes action-oriented mitzvot, from it saying the Shema, not just thinking about it, from saying all the brachot which the rabbis created. I think that this was the way that they tried to create in our experience, in our existence, one of clinging with God, l'dav kabo. How do we cling? We cling when we're constantly involved in it. And that's, again, was the Rambam's thought. We always need to have the love of God in our minds. But how do we do this? Chazal gave us this opportunity by constantly saying brachot. Now, of course, we can take anything which is holy and we can turn it into something which is not holy. We can go and take the brachot, and excuse me, and I apologize for this example, and we can turn it into tefillah, into davening. Davening where sometimes we mindlessly say the words. Now, obviously, if we do that, we miss the point. And the same thing in a relationship. The person who just says thank you without even thinking about it, without having any feeling behind it, something is missing. We have an opportunity to have a relationship with God, and that is something which is really good for us, and it's really good for the relationship because it creates that consciousness, which means it's not enough to always think about the other person. It's certainly not enough to take the other one for granted, but to articulate and to say thank you and to show that appreciation is something which is really good because that builds the appreciation. It seems to be that's what Chazal did by creating this whole world of brachot, which are rabbinic inventions based upon really a limited amount of examples of brachot on a Torah level. And what they did for us is they allowed us to have a relationship with God and even get to this point of l'dav kabo, where we cling to God, and we therefore have really the most incredible relationship imaginable.